in every way. Jesus is breaking the boundary of race, the boundary of national and religious prejudice, and he extends that call by saying, go and do likewise. Our American Baptist colleagues with international ministries are doing some of that boundary-breaking call. I recently read a post by Jeff Dieselberg. He serves in Bangkok, Thailand. He's the pastor of the Song Sawang Church. It's a congregation created by women who've been rescued from sexual exploitation through the Nightlight mission. And he writes about a young man named Pub. Pub came to the Song Sawang Church every Sunday with his fiancée, writes Jeff. Every Sunday, I could see in his eyes that he was stretching toward faith. When our church held its second annual men's retreat, it was obvious to all the men how he had grown, and it begged the question from us, Pub, are you ready to accept Christ? And that's when he told us with tears, I can't. I am the only son in my family, and according to Buddhist tradition, I must enter the Buddhist monkhood at the temples so that my mom can go to heaven. That's what many Buddhists believe in Thailand. So they vowed to pray for him and encouraged him, saying, all things are possible with God. 3 weeks later, Jeff writes that Pub grabbed him after church and said, I have too much God inside me already. I can't go into the Buddhist monkhood. I talked to my parents, and they released me to decide on my own. And with both men in tears, Jeff hugged him and prayed with him to receive Jesus. The amazing, boundary-breaking call of Jesus. The boundaries of race and religion broken down so every person can be drawn to God. How we need that right here in this nation and in our world. In the wake of the increasing racial tensions, the loss of life in Minnesota and Baton Rouge and Dallas, and now the city of Nice added to that long list of violence and loss. More than ever, we need Jesus to help us break down the racial and religious barriers to understanding and love. And I think one of the ways that God does that is through things like Lisa's beautiful song. God can use music to help break down some of those barriers. For the last 6 years, I've been working with adults whose lives are affected by mental impairment and mental illness. Often these individuals are rejected as being unable to contribute to their communities and unable to make a difference in the world. They've learned, but I've learned, that Jesus' boundary-breaking call extends to all people, even those with disabilities. This year during Holy Week, I was planning and preparing for a Good Friday service at the Rainbow Acres community. I wanted it to be engaging, to allow the ranchers to feel involved in the story of Jesus' passion and crucifixion, and to really understand. So I adapted a service that followed the Stations of the Cross, and we created 3 stations. One, we would begin in a stand of mesquite trees, which would be our Garden of Gethsemane. We would move to a patio area where the trials before the Sanhedrin and before Pilate would take place. And we would end at a place on our ranch campus that's called Glory Hill, a small hill that's topped with a pavilion and a cross. We would alternate between songs and prayers and readings. One of the staff members would be that voice of Jesus. But to provide a visual accompaniment, I wanted to add a few silent actors who would create the still tableaus during the reading. I wanted to involve the ranchers as much as I could, but I knew that the role of Jesus was a critical one. I couldn't choose someone who would ham it up during a serious moment of the service. So I prayed about who should play Jesus. And during a conversation with a caregiver about one of our newest ranchers, his name was Dale, it suddenly occurred to me that he was the one that I needed to ask. When I spoke with Dale about the service, he said, "I'll do it. I know how to be Jesus," he said. Indeed he did. From the moment we put on the simple costumes, Dale entered into the character of Jesus. When he was kneeling in the garden, his face reflected the depth and agony of prayer. Dale led us from one station to the next with slow, deliberate steps, never breaking character. Dale stood before the authorities with patience and acceptance. And finally, he moved to that place on Glory Hill, and he lifted his eyes to the cross. Afterwards, Dar, is there another picture? Thanks. Afterwards, one of my co-workers who had attended the service commented to me about the look on Dale's face. His face was filled with an incredible look of love, she said. She had not been active in her faith, but as she told me that, tears came to her eyes and a new appreciation for Jesus and for his sacrifice came to her heart. The boundary-breaking call of Jesus, even to Dale. The boundary-breaking call for him to be a witness of true love. One of the things that has excited me about this First Baptist Church in Delaware has been your mission statement. As a congregation, you state that your mission is to worship God and to teach and encourage and practice discipleship. And I've learned some of the ways that you do that. I can see the boundary-breaking call of Jesus in action in the ways that you have been God worshipers and disciple makers and disciple practicers. You've been welcoming the homeless into this building. You have been leaving this building and feeding the children in the park. You're going to be singing of your love for Jesus from the band shell. You have re-roofed the house of a veteran and gotten the whole neighborhood involved. You have rebuilt a baptistry that was spiritually significant for Native American brothers and sisters in Oklahoma. And you have invited me to stand here before you as a candidate for pastor. Maybe there are other barriers that still stand in your way. Maybe personal barriers or boundaries that are in the way of your being a disciple today. Are you up against something, a barrier of disability or age or tradition? Is there a barrier of language or culture that is keeping you from pursuing the call of Jesus? Perhaps there's a barrier of fear or a barrier of sin that Jesus wants to break down for you. A barrier of addiction. As you go through this week and this day, I invite you to continue to consider the boundary-breaking call of Jesus. What barriers that Jesus is breaking down for you, and perhaps what barriers that Jesus is asking you to break down for others, so that they may be invited into the family of God. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, sometimes there seems to be barriers in our way to following you, barriers that can seem insurmountable. So today your reminder is that only one thing is necessary: to trust in your boundary breaking power, to have faith in your boundary breaking love,